Tulsi Gabbard, great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
And congratulations, by the way, on the book.
Thank you.
It was a fascinating book. And, I know a lot of folks are talking about the book in terms of why you left the Democrat Party. And, that's kind of the sell of the book. But not really. The heart of the book seems to be a whole much different than that. So, for example, you're a free thinker.
Yes.
The establishment does not like free thinkers and a free thinking society. Talk to me a little bit about that dynamic, because there has just been a lot going on as it relates to the mistrust and the distrust of public institutions, whether it be the media and government, and free thinkers like yourself come along and not received well at all.
Not at all, and I'm glad that was your takeaway. Well, obviously it is the story about what drove me to leave the Democratic Party, a party I was part of for about 20 years. But really it gets to the heart of what is wrong with our government, the Washington establishment today, and most importantly, how do we go about fixing it? And you're exactly right. This has been my experience throughout my time involved in national politics, especially, is independent-minded people, common sense-minded people, independent and free thinkers are not welcome in Washington. And you see the powers of the political parties who too often are more interested in the party power than actually what is in the best interest of the country. So throughout the book, of course, I speak about my own personal experience of having the Democrat elite who are in power right now in the White House directly trying to censor, smear, undermine my credibility and so forth, because I had the audacity to stand up and speak the truth, and to call them out for the things that they're doing that undermine our fundamental rights and freedoms enshrined in the Constitution, that call them out for taking the side of the military-industrial complex over the side of what's in the best interest of the American people and our own national security, and the ability for Americans across the country to live in peace, to be confident in our freedoms, and that our government will not take them away, and to pursue prosperity. That abuse of power that we're seeing coming from the Democrat elite right now, and increasingly so in increasingly brazen ways, is a direct threat to our fundamental freedoms, our democracy, and the rule of law.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because it makes me think, of course, of another free thinker, Donald Trump. You and him seem to have a lot in common in that sense, for sure. On trial now, and yet the left is saying he's a threat to democracy, and is also saying that he's ready to jail his political opponents at the same time that Biden's DOJ is looking to jail Biden's top opponent.
Exactly.
You can't make this stuff up.
And of course, Donald Trump and what they're doing to him is the most public abuse of the Department of Justice, and you're exactly right. They are doing the things that they are accusing Donald Trump of doing if he is elected as president again, and it's a pure distraction tactic. It is an attempt to be able to divert voters' views away from how they are abusing power, and instead try to paint a picture of Donald Trump as some kind of crazy dictator. They say this: if he's elected, this will be the last election we ever have in America. All of these really insane comments that point to a picture that is not real, and it's not grounded in evidence or precedents, for that matter. You don't have to guess about what kind of president he'll be, because he was president for 4 years, and he did not do the kinds of things that the Biden-Harris administration have been doing from the very beginning when they took office. So the lawfare and the weaponization of the justice system against Donald Trump is the most prominent example of that abuse of power, the undermining of the rule of law. But as I share in my book, they are also targeting and going after everyday Americans who are their political opposition, whether they be peaceful pro-life protesters or people who are challenging the neocon warmongering foreign policy of the Biden-Harris administration, or those who are, most famously throughout the COVID epidemic, or the pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, people who are speaking the truth or just merely questioning why is the government forcing us to do this? Why are they not willing to allow freedom of speech for different healthcare professionals who are challenging the government narrative on this thing. The level of censorship, the level of abuse of power and taking away our freedom even to go and worship with friends in Hawaii. We had churches that they wanted to go and gather on the beach, outside, in public, small groups of people for their church service, and we're told if you do that, you will get arrested. I mean, this precedence has been set by the Biden-Harris administration, the Democrat elite, and if they are allowed to remain in power, we will only see that not only continue, but escalate.
What's the playbook here? Because you lay it out in kind of a 3 stages in the book. You talk about first they try to ignore you, then they try to destroy your reputation, and then they go for total destruction. Yes. This happened to you.
Yes. I experienced this in different ways throughout my 8 years in Congress, throughout my time as a vice chair of the DNC, but it was full bore in 2020 when I was running the Democratic presidential primary, and it started on the very day I announced my candidacy. The first volley of attacks that started to plant the seed. This was an NBC News article that was published. We knew something was going to come out because they asked me for a comment, and they said, okay, we're going to publish this story in about a week. They published it early to coincide with my announcement of my candidacy, planting the seeds that somehow there's something suspicious with Tulsi Gabbard. There's some chatter in Russia about Tulsi Gabbard. Again, baseless, evidenceless innuendo and smears that started on day one and continued on with a very, as you mentioned, there is a clear playbook that they used against me. They try to pretend, well, she's not a serious candidate. And then when they see people pay attention, they're like, oh, okay, well, we need to escalate our efforts here, and then really went full bore in the smear tactics. And then towards the end, it was like, let's throw everything in the kitchen sink and try to block voters from even knowing that Tulsi Gabbard is a candidate running for president.
Well, and what's interesting there, and you talk about this in the book, the suppression of what they're trying to do to you in that debate in 2019, where you talk about, oh, look, all of a sudden, after doing really well at that debate, a lot of interest
in you. All 6 minutes of it.
Yeah, 6 minutes, for the limited time they gave you, there you find afterwards where you have a real opportunity to capitalize, from a campaign perspective, and your Google Ads account literally suspended. Talk to me about what happened there. Maybe not the granular details, but more about the big tech issue as it relates to free speech suppression, along with the government kind of working hand in hand here.
This is a really important point, because what I experienced then in 2019 and 2020 is exactly what has been happening ever since. And there's more and more evidence that's come to light that's proving that point. People ask me all the time, in the book I talk about the Democrat elite. Who are they? Like, give us an example. It is not only the Democrat elite who are in power, the elected leaders, but it is their partners in big tech and companies like Google. It is their partners in the mainstream media. And so what I experienced then, where Google suspended our ad account with no explanation, and for that critical period of time, and then all of a sudden it popped back up again. We didn't do anything because we didn't know what to do. It was a very glaring example of that interference in our democracy and our election. And we're seeing now, study by study, how they funnel Republican candidates, bulk emails into spam folders many more times than they do to Democrat candidate emails. We are seeing how under the Biden administration, the FBI has spoken to different social media and big tech organizations about which accounts to silence or which content to keep suppressed and not being brought forward to the American people. And so this is the Democrat elite that I'm talking about. And so their amassed powers and their collusion is all working towards one specific purpose. They want power. They want to stay in power or grow that power at the cost of taking away our fundamental rights and freedoms and undermining our democracy. How do
you fight back? How do you in a way, beat the deep state, if you will? Because the deep state isn't just DC, as you talked about. It's big tech, it's media, it's everywhere. You call it the rotten our government specifically. What's the recipe here?
It's us. It's we the people. It's so easy to feel hopeless because they're very powerful. They have a lot of money. They control a lot of very influential platforms and companies. And so it is easy to feel like there's no way to beat them. But when I go back to our founders, I go back and look at how intentional they were in constructing our founding documents that serve as the pillars of our democratic republic, our constitutional republic. And they place the power specifically in the hands of the people for moments like this. Understanding the fragility of democracy and how sometimes those in power tend to abuse that power. We have to defend our freedom by exercising our freedom. We have to call out those leaders who are abusing their power for what they're doing and hold them accountable. And really the ultimate way of doing that is in an election. And that's my hope. That is my hope in this election, is that Americans from across party lines, Americans who have maybe different views on how to solve immigration reform or healthcare or education in this country, now is a time when we've got to come together around the fundamental rights and freedoms, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, because these are the very things that are under attack.
This is not your book about the fact that you are a strong candidate to possibly be vice president, or at least the pick. I'm curious about your thoughts on that, what you've heard, the word on the street. But beyond that, what does it say about the electorate today that someone like you, a former Democrat, but someone who has been liberal on some social issues in the past, there's been some changes along the line, or some epiphanies, if you will. But what does it say about our electorate today? Because Trump has changed the game in terms of what the roadmap is here, not just Republican and Democrat. So I'm kind of curious to get your take as to why you would be a strong VP candidate in today's politics, if you will.
I think this is one of those moments where we have the opportunity to rise above partisan politics and truly put America first. President Trump has his America First policies, and he has a huge following of people because of that stated intent that he has become synonymous with his political work, is putting America first, make America great again. What does that actually mean in practice when we have too many people in politics who put their own self-interest first, or the interests of their party first, and leave the American people behind? And so, for me to be in a position now where I can reach out to and connect with folks who may not have ever considered voting for a Republican or voting for Donald Trump before, there's an opportunity here to remind people of our responsibility as citizens to put our country first. And that's why I titled my book, For Love of Country. If we stay focused on our love and appreciation for our country and our freedom, then we can get past the divisive labels that are too often used to pit us against each other, and instead stand together as Americans and toss out those in office who are directly threatening and actually taking away our freedoms today.
That's very interesting. You say divisive labels, because you hear MAGA, and the media would love, if they say MAGA, that's code for, in their words, I'm assuming some sort of destruction of the country and a threat to democracy. But you would consider yourself, you're America First. You consider yourself MAGA, I would assume, but the media will take it a different way. Unless I'm putting words in your mouth, I don't know if you consider yourself MAGA.
So I always have a hard time with labels myself. Yeah. But from a philosophical standpoint, from an ideological standpoint, I will always put my country first. I will always put my country first. Put the well-being and interests of the American people first. The fact that this MAGA label has the effect that it has on some people is a direct result of the Democrat elite led by Joe Biden, as we saw in that Philadelphia speech where he told the entire country that anybody who voted for Donald Trump is a MAGA extremist that is the greatest domestic threat we face, is what he said. And so he made it okay to put this label as essentially a domestic enemy or domestic terrorist on anybody who voted for Donald Trump. But when we look at who who are these MAGA Republicans? And you hear that term thrown out every day by, the minority leader in the House, by Chuck Schumer, by Joe Biden, all of the Democrat talking as the MAGA Republicans, as though, they must be rooted out of this country because of the threat that they pose. And then you couple that with the weaponization of law enforcement and the Department of Justice under this administration, you get a very dangerous picture that looks a lot more like a dictatorship that's using our government institutions to go after their political opposition than one where we can disagree on our politics, but we respect our right to express our views in this country. Who are the MAGA Republicans? They are the moms for liberty who are standing up for the well-being of their kids. The parent who goes and protests at a Board of Education meeting because he doesn't want his daughter to be forced to compete against the biological boy on the swim team. Common sense stuff. People who say, hey, we don't have a country unless we have secure borders. Well, gosh, if you believe that we have to have secure borders, you are now an extreme MAGA Republican in their eyes. When we look at these, and these are some of the examples that I get into in my book, because these aren't Democrat or Republican ideas or issues. These are issues that should be important to every one of us as Americans, and yet they have become used as politically divisive tools in order for the Democrat elite to try to remain in power. The more we are divided, the more they are able to stay in power.
You have been outspoken against the Democrat elites. You have been supportive of President Trump and many of his policy positions. What has the reaction been like from family, from friends? That has, I don't know if it's been tough for you, but I'm sure you've heard a bunch from them.
I have. And for quite some time, this is people who truly know me, those who are closest to me, remain close to me because they know my heart. And even if they may disagree with the policy position, they know my heart and trust that I am doing what I feel is best for our country and for the American people. There are others which include some family members, who have had such issue, and this was even while I was in Congress, with positions that I've taken. I'll give you one example that was probably the most extreme, was when I had what they viewed as the audacity to go and accept an invitation to meet with Donald Trump just 2 weeks after he was elected in 2016. I was the first Democrat to go meet him in Trump Tower. This was right before Thanksgiving. And I was invited to go and speak to him about foreign policy, about what's going on in the Middle East. How do we defeat radical Islamist terrorism? ISIS, as you remember, was at an extreme level of wreaking terror around the world. And of course, I took the opportunity. I had just gotten home in Hawaii for the Thanksgiving break, and I think I was there a few hours before I got a call saying, hey, can you come meet President Trump tomorrow? So I got on a plane, took a red eye to New York City, had a great substantive point-to-point, one-on-one conversation with him about these very serious issues that I care very much about, and that it was very clear to me that he cared very much about and wanted to be thoughtful as he was about to take on the presidency and to be commander-in-chief. As soon as I walked out of Trump Tower, I looked at my phone. It was blowing up, and there were Democrat colleagues, there were people who I know, there were people who I probably considered friends, and there were some members of my family who were outraged. They had no idea what happened in the meeting, and they didn't care. They were outraged, and the accusation pretty much, the through line through all of it was, how dare you meet with Donald Trump and humanize him in front of the American people, which says everything about how twisted their mindset is, and how what is now commonly called Trump derangement syndrome, that it wasn't called it back then, but how deeply it impacted people who otherwise I might have thought to be, common sense, kind of intelligent people.
For sure. Let me move on to the Dr. Phil portion of the interview, so to speak. Can we get a couch out here? Look, in the book, you talk about that tomboy spirit that you have, right? Yeah, surfing, martial arts, no Barbie dolls and dresses, at least for a time. What does that say about you? What does it say about your core? If there was a tree, what tree would you be? No, just kidding, not about the tree. But what does it say about you? Because you were an introvert growing up, really. So take me into that world as to how that type of growing up kind of made you who you are today.
I think the fact that I grew up with 3 older brothers. My younger sister's a 5-year gap between me and my first brother, who's closest to me in age, and then my sister and I are a couple of years apart. And so my sister and I were inseparable. She is the textbook definition extrovert. I'm the textbook definition introvert. And so I was very happy to employ her to be my spokesperson, even as kids, because she loved talking to people. She was always had something to say about whatever it was. I was more often had my nose buried in books or going out and doing martial arts and all of that. But the thing that I appreciate most about growing up in Hawaii and some of the experiences that I had at an early age was experiencing and knowing from a pretty young age that I was happiest when I was doing things for others. And I didn't know exactly what that meant for my life. I didn't think, well, I'm going to pursue a path of politics or this or that. I just knew that I wanted to find a way to do that, to be of service with my life. And it's taken me in some very, very different directions. But I'm grateful to have found so many different ways where I have been able to be of service.
Talk to me about the faith component here. I noticed, I did a quick little Adobe search, 121 references to God in the book, by the way. There's a stat for you.
I didn't do that search.
That's right. Well, I can be a little strange in that way.
No.
But beyond that, I mean, look, a Catholic father, Hindu mother, you chose Hinduism. Talk to me a little bit about that aspect of your life.
For me, religion, and this is something that I've understood from a young age, real religion is about love for God. And so, growing up as a kid, sectarianism was not something that existed in my, I didn't even know what it was, because it was the most natural thing for me to, hear stories about Jesus of Nazareth as we were being put to bed by my mom. And to hear stories from the Bhagavad Gita, scripture from India, which means the song of God. So both. And understanding that the main takeaway was love God. Love God with your life. Jesus Christ, first and second commandment. These teachings to me are things that I took to heart. And that are the foundation of who I am, my purpose in life, and why I do what I do. It is the driving factor behind the decisions that I make, whether it was, running for office in Hawaii when I was 21, leaving that at a time where it would have been very easy to stay there and, gain seniority. But I left and volunteered to deploy to Iraq with my brothers and sisters in uniform. And it's taken me in and out of quote unquote politics, but always those decisions being made, how can I best be of service? Where can I make that maximum impact? And remaining very focused, even in this crazy world of Washington, that my desire is to be pleasing to God, first and foremost. And that has, provided me with that foundation and that strength and that clarity to not fall into the Washington traps of okay, you've got to please the political party boss or the speaker or, the famous person in media. And if you don't make them happy, they might not invite you back on their show, and just all of the silly things that happen in Washington that unfortunately people use as barometers to make their decisions on how they cast their votes.
Hinduism and Christianity, obviously, they're different. This just in, very different, actually. So help me through that a little bit, because from a Judeo-Christian standpoint, our nation founded on Judeo-Christian principles of the Bible, of the God of the Bible. It's not a God necessarily that the Hindus believe in, if you will. So help me through that in terms of how you see the founding of this country from a Judeo-Christian standpoint. I'm curious about that.
Well, I think I'll just point out Hinduism is probably one of the most misunderstood religions. It is a monotheistic religion that is one God. There is one God, one supreme being, one all-knowing and all-loving God, and he has many names. And so that I think is the most important thing. Hinduism is a non-sectarian religion. You don't convert into Hinduism or convert out of it. It's for me really more about a spiritual practice of developing that very personal, loving relationship with God, knowing in my heart at all times that God is my best friend, and that choice that I've made in my life to dedicate my life in loving service to God. And what better way to be pleasing to God than to be of service to God's children?
Speaking of God, the Democrats and God, you talk a lot about that in this book. And I'll just look at, as I put on my reading glasses, my old person reading glasses, you say they've walked away from God. They walked away from objective truth. You actually have a chapter entitled, They See God as the Enemy. You say they're hostile to people of faith. And you say you think that Democrats, or at least the Democrat elites, want to get rid of God and the foundation because then it crumbles. Then you say they want to be God. So is the Democrat Party, in essence, on the side of evil here?
Yes. When you have people in positions of power, and whether they will admit it publicly or not, they see themselves and put themselves in the position of being the ultimate authority. They see themselves as the ones who should be the arbiter of who gets to speak and who does not get to speak. They see themselves as the arbiter of objective truth, that they are the ones who can say, no, David, if you believe that you are a woman, then you can be a woman. This denial of objective truth, and of course this is having Title IX and their destruction of Title IX, there are very real impacts and implications on how they are trying to erase women and girls and take away opportunities. But in all of this conversation, and this is what I get into in my book, is when you have people in positions of power who are denying the existence of objective truth, that there are biological differences between men and women, then they themselves are removing these guardrails in our society, that the truth then becomes whatever they deem it to be, putting themselves in that position of trying to be God, because they then get to tell us what is true and what is not. They believe they should be able to control us in every aspect of our lives. They believe that they have the authority and the right to take away God-given, truly God-given rights and freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. You can see in dictators in different countries and throughout history how dangerous that mindset is and the evil that comes from that.
Well, and to play off objective truth, you talk about that gender-affirming surgery, all the nice flowery words, which you say, and I can see you shaking your head because that comes across in the book. I mean, you say specifically out of all of the lies of the Biden administration, this one probably bothers you the most because, well, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I guess my question is it a form of child abuse here?
It is. It is clearly a form of child abuse. Them targeting the most vulnerable people in our country who don't have the ability to, as an adult does, to make clear decisions for themselves. If an adult says, okay, I want to go and have surgery and mutilate my own parts for whatever their reasoning may be, in a free country, you can do that. And you can go live your life. Don't force me to celebrate that decision. Don't force me to I will make my own decisions with my life. You go live your life. But the fact that they are targeting young children, and some of those examples in my book, they're targeting 2-year-old kids, 3-year-old kids, and encouraging them to not as like I was a tomboy growing up.
Right.
If I were a tomboy growing up in today's society, I would have had counselors, I would have had doctors saying, well, Tulsi, you should really go and start taking these, hormone blockers, puberty blockers. You should really go and start considering some kind of, transition surgery because you're obviously a boy stuck in a girl's body. And unfortunately, and we see this happening with a lot of kids these days who are trusting and believing in people who are supposed to have their best interest at heart. And I find it so offensive and an egregious abuse of their responsibility to have so-called medical professionals advocating for this, knowing that in many cases these surgeries are irreversible, and that when we have kids who begin this transition and realize they've made a horrible mistake and then try to come back from it, there's no support for them whatsoever. How it is that we live in a time where this is not something that's universally accepted and understood, that kids are not equipped to make these decisions that will impact them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, what about the abortion issue? Because Democrats say they're the party of women, but this has now kind of been an interesting dynamic as to how they believe it's going to help them in 2024. They're also okay with abortion all the way through late term. So how do you see that, and what Republicans can do to kind of blunt that issue in 2024?
Well, first, I think it's important to recognize that the end of Roe v. Wade was the right decision to make, to leave this very difficult and complex issue and conversation up to the states to determine. Of course, there's no doubt in my mind, we're already seeing the kind of fear-mongering that the Democrat elite are doing to try to scare women into voting for Joe Biden based on these insane ideas that have and ads that are not rooted in reality in any way, shape, or form, but also to propagate abortion and promote abortion and to celebrate abortion to the point where we had Democrats in Congress on the House floor, I believe was for a State of the Union speech, with pins on that said abortion with a heart on it. Not understand, maybe they do understand it, but not recognizing and pointing out that an abortion is the taking of a human life. It is a very serious thing. So this will have an impact on our election, and we will see if people fall for that fear-mongering that Democrats are pushing forward.
I've got so much more. I know we have limited time, but I got to get to foreign policy. Yeah. I mean, obviously, this is obviously near and dear to your heart. More than that, it's really kind of a big deal for you. You have said you're not an isolationist or an interventionist. You're a realist, is what you've said. Explain that a little bit more in the context of what we've seen over the last 25 years. I mean, the forever war in Afghanistan, weapons of mass destruction that kind of was like, wait a minute, hold on here for a second. That wasn't necessarily true at all. And nation building, all of that. Help us through your position on that, because there's a personal aspect to it, as you write in the book, about your brothers and sisters in your brigade who never made it home. And that's a memory that never leaves you. Talk about how that has literally changed your life, that time in Iraq, serving there.
It's what motivated me to run for Congress and to run for president, to honor those who never made that trip home. And it came from a recognition of personal experience of how too many of our politicians on both sides of the aisle so easily, immediately resort to war, whether it's economic warfare or kinetic warfare, when posed with the foreign policy challenge, without thinking through what is the cost going to be? What is our objective? Does this actually serve the best interest of our country, of our national security, of our economy, the well-being of the American people? Their emotional knee-jerk reaction is like, well, we've just got to go drop some bombs, or we've got to go punish this bad guy, or we've got to go and topple this dictator of this country. So short-sighted, and as we've seen over the last 20 plus years, so often over and over end up putting us in a position where it has undermined our own national security interests and come at the cost of countless lives and American taxpayer dollars. We must exhaust all diplomatic means and measures to deal with these challenges that we face, and they are unique, and there are many on the foreign policy front, recognizing war must be the last resort, and that these decisions must always be made within the context of what is in the best interest of the American people in our country.
You mentioned American taxpayer dollars. Is there a difference between funding Israel and funding Ukraine? Like, how do you see that exactly? I'm just curious about that.
Yes, there is a very
Because
clear
radical
difference.
Islamic extremism is what Israel is on the front lines of every day.
There is a very real difference, and there will always be with every unique challenge that we face and that unique decision that must be made. Using those two examples, are we better off increasing and escalating tensions and waging this proxy war against Russia, of which Ukraine has never had any shot at winning, increasing the likelihood of nuclear war? That is counter to and undermining our own national security. What to speak of the fact that we've spent hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars now for what purpose? For what purpose? Putin was wrong to invade Ukraine. There's no question about it. There's a lot of historical context that went into that, but the bottom line is we should have had a president who would have gone in very early and negotiated a peaceful end to that war as quickly as possible. Save lives, save American taxpayer dollars. When you look at what's happening in the war between Israel and Hamas, and it is a war between Israel and Hamas, a radical Islamist terrorist group, this is just the latest front of this war that's been waged for a very long time between these radical Islamist terrorist groups that have been waging it militarily and ideologically. This is in our best interest, as well as all freedom-loving countries and civilization, to take on what is the greatest short and long-term threat to freedom.
And yet, Joe Biden just recently pausing weapon shipments to Israel. How do you see that? I mean, there are folks that say he's on the side of Hamas at this point.
He is acting out of fear, which is why he has failed, like previous administrations before him, to wage this counter-ideological warfare against this Islamist ideology whose goal is to establish Islamic rule over the entire world, even with what's happening in our college campuses, even knowing that this is Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, this is their objective. He refuses to call it out for what it is because he's afraid of being called an Islamophobe. And it's the same reason why he is not taking seriously the need to defeat Hamas and creating a policy that really, frankly, doesn't make any sense.
Two last questions. You mentioned the college protesters. Free speech absolutism, knock yourself out. But when does free speech become, if not hate speech, when does it cross the line? I mean, how do you see that? Because you're obviously a free speech absolutist. So if these college protesters want to say their gobbledygook stuff, they can't even spell Palestine correctly, knock yourself out. But obviously there's a difference when they start to vandalize buildings and all that. That's different. But what about the speech aspect? I mean, they can do what they want to do. But when does it cross the line? How do you see that? Or is there a crossing of the line?
Well, freedom of speech is and should be an absolute right for every American in this country, even if I find that speech to be absolutely abhorrent. And this is where we have to be careful about even people with good intentions saying, oh, well, it's hate speech and we have to ban hate speech. What you may deem as hate speech may be a very different definition from what I would deem as hate speech. And this is what we're seeing. We have Christians who are being censored and silenced because people in the LGBTQIA community view what they are preaching or what they are saying or their views as hate speech. So we have to be careful about making sure that we defend free speech for all Americans. The line that we've seen being crossed numerous times on these college campuses and in these protests is they are inhibiting the freedom of movement for other students, Jewish students, faculty on these campuses. They are creating an unsafe environment and threatening the safety and security of others, and they're breaking the law. They're breaking the law.
Right. Yeah, I think a kind of a period end at that point. Hey, I want to wrap up here, but I don't say but. Let me wrap up by asking you this, because there's a sign that you saw in Iraq. You talk about it in your book. It said, "Is today the day?" It really has become the calling in your life. Talk to me about that as we wrap up here. Maybe give the context of that story, because I just found that to be fascinating.
We had just gotten to Iraq. Our camp was about 40 miles north of Baghdad. It was squarely within what was then known as the Sunni Triangle. I was walking around the camp, kind of a large one, getting familiar with where things were and would be home for the next year. And I saw this big sign that was right at the gate. It was the north gate where most of the security patrols went in and out of every day. And it stopped me in my tracks because it read in big block letters, "Is today the day?" And it's a message that I am intentional in keeping at the forefront, because it is a reminder that the end of this life can come at any moment. And it is a reflection of, what am I doing with my life? How am I making the most of this blessing of life that God has given me to be of service to Him, to make that positive impact on others? And it is just as true of us as we sit here today as it was for us serving in that war zone in Iraq in 2005. It is an important perspective that allows us to see clearly what is important, what to focus on, and just tune out and block all of the noise and the crap that surrounds us on a daily basis. And it is a reminder of who we are as children of God, and not allow ourselves to be used as pawns by those who are seeking power and are driven by their own selfish ambition. It gives us the strength to do what is important and right and just.
Do you feel happy now in your life? Do you feel more empowered than ever?
I am happy. I am at peace, even in the midst of all of the chaos, because I know exactly who I am. I know what I am doing with my life. And while I don't know where this path leads, I know exactly that wherever it goes, I will remain focused on my mission of service.
I wrap in the spirit of aloha. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
So much.
Aloha.
Aloha.